There's a specific experience this video is going to name. It's the experience of being in a situation that requires nothing from you. A Sunday afternoon. A quiet evening after the work is done. A vacation where the calendar is actually clear. And finding that your nervous system has not received the message. The alert is still running. The engine is idling too high. Something in the background is still scanning for threat, and no act of will has ever fully turned it off. That's not anxiety. That's not burnout, though both of those may also be present. That's a specific biological event, and it has a precise name. This video is about the mechanism that produces it, not what cortisol does. You probably already know that. What specifically breaks the system's ability to shut itself down. Let's start with what's actually happening at the biological level. The HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland, is the body's primary stress response architecture. It operates as a cascade. A perceived threat reaches the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases a hormone called CRH, corticotropin-releasing hormone. CRH signals the pituitary. The pituitary releases ACTH. ACTH travels through the bloodstream to the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands release cortisol. Cortisol mobilizes energy, sharpens focus, suppresses inflammation. The body is now in operational mode. This system was built for sprints, a predator, a physical confrontation, a threat that is acute, localized, and critically over. What it was not designed for is a 22-year executive career where the threat is never fully resolved, where the inbox reloads, where the performance review is always next quarter, where there is no moment the body can call clear. That distinction is the entire problem. The system ran exactly as designed. It was designed for a different environment than the one you've been operating in. And after years, sometimes decades, of sustained activation, something in the architecture changes. Not the system turning on, the system losing its ability to turn off. Now let's look at what actually breaks after years of continuous activation. Every well-functioning system has a shutdown signal. The HPA axis is no different. When cortisol is released, the body's design is for it to be self-limiting. Cortisol binds to glucocorticoid receptors, GRs, in two structures that matter most here, the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. When those receptors detect that cortisol has done its job, they send a signal back up the chain. Threat resolved. Stand down. That's the off switch. Here is what sustained chronic stress does to that switch. Research on HPA axis dysregulation consistently shows that prolonged cortisol exposure causes those glucocorticoid receptors to downregulate, essentially to reduce in number and sensitivity. The hippocampus, which is supposed to be telling the HPA axis signal received, you can stop now, gradually loses its ability to send that message effectively. Read that again, because this is the thing no basic cortisol content tells you. The feedback loop breaks, not because the system fails to activate, because the circuit that tells it to deactivate has been worn down by the very activation it was meant to limit. This is not a metaphor. Studies examining GR density under chronic stress show measurable reduction in hippocampal receptor function, a structural change in the brain's ability to regulate its own stress response. And here's the downstream consequence that maps precisely onto the experience this video opened with. When the hippocampus can no longer reliably signal stand down, the amygdala, the threat detection center, runs with less inhibition. The system stays alert. The baseline shifts upward, which is why the 3 a.m. wake-up is not a sleep problem. It is a cortisol pulse, a natural point in the circadian rhythm where cortisol would normally rise slightly, amplified in a dysregulated system into a full alert signal. No threat. The signal fires anyway. And why the afternoon cognitive flatness is not low motivation. It's a disrupted cortisol rhythm, a system that can no longer produce the clean arc from morning peak to evening quiet, leaving a flat, depleted line where sharpness used to be. This is a system problem, which means it has system solutions. Let's map this onto your actual experience with precision. Because the gap between the clinical description and the felt experience is where most content loses the thread. Morning. Cortisol is supposed to peak between 30 and 45 minutes after waking, the cortisol awakening response. In a well-regulated system, this peak is sharp, clean, and brief. It primes cognition, clears sleep inertia, initiates the day. In a dysregulated system, the peak is blunted, delayed, or flattened. The morning doesn't start clean. It starts with effort that shouldn't be required yet. Mid-morning. The window of sharpness is shorter than it used to be. Word retrieval takes a fraction longer. The second draft of a thought requires more deliberate construction than it did at 38. You chalk this up to volume, to complexity, to age. It is none of those things. It is the output of a cortisol rhythm that has lost its architecture. Afternoon. The flatness arrives reliably. Not tiredness exactly, more like a compression. Like running on a frequency you used to run on automatically and now have to manually sustain. Evening. The work is done. The house is quiet. And the system, which has been running high all day, does not step down. It has forgotten, structurally, how to step down. The hypervigilance is not a personality trait. The inability to genuinely rest is not a character flaw. The 3 a.m. mind that is already running loops before you've chosen to start it, that is a hippocampus that has lost signal strength. A feedback circuit that has been worn by load until it can no longer do what it was designed to do. This is not anxiety. This is not aging. This is a damaged feedback circuit. And here is what that means. Damaged circuits can be repaired. They have inputs. Those inputs can be changed, not eventually. Not when the conditions are right. The inputs are available today. The resource in the description maps this system into a 90-day protocol designed specifically for this audience. Not a wellness framework, not a stress reduction retreat, but an executive-level architecture for rebuilding the feedback circuit you've just seen explained. It's called the Executive Burnout Exit Map. The link is below. Now let's talk about the 3 inputs that actually shift the system. There is a reason the protocols you've already tried didn't hold. Intermittent fasting, cold plunges, sleep tracking, morning routines. None of these were wrong in principle. They were working on the behavioral surface of a problem that lives in the feedback architecture. You were treating the sensation. The mechanism underneath it was unchanged. The 3 inputs that actually target the HPA axis itself. First, circadian cortisol rhythm restoration. The cortisol awakening response is directly modulated by light exposure to the retina within the first hour of waking. Not exercise, not food, light. Research on photobioregulation and the HPA axis shows that morning light exposure, outdoor, direct, 10 to 20 minutes, strengthens the cortisol peak at waking and steepens the slope of the daily rhythm. That slope is the architecture your afternoon is running on. You are not chasing a morning routine. You are recalibrating the daily cortisol arc that determines how your brain performs for the next 14 hours. Second, resistance training and glucocorticoid receptor sensitivity. This is the one most men in this situation are doing, but not understanding the mechanism they're actually activating. Progressive resistance training has documented effects on glucocorticoid receptor sensitivity in the hippocampus. It doesn't just burn cortisol. It restores the hippocampus's capacity to receive the feedback signal. That is not the same thing. One treats the level, the other repairs the receptor. Third, diurnal salivary cortisol testing. This is the number that actually matters. And it is not the number your doctor ran. A fasting cortisol draw gives you a single point. What the HPA axis actually needs to be understood is a diurnal pattern. 4 measurements across the day. Morning peak, mid-morning, afternoon, evening. That pattern tells you exactly where in the dysregulation curve you are. Whether the awakening response is blunted, whether the afternoon floor is elevated, whether evening cortisol is still high when the system should be quiet. Without that map, every intervention is aimed at a target you can't actually see. That test costs less than most wearables. It can be ordered through most functional medicine labs without a physician referral. It is the baseline from which everything else is calibrated. The Executive Burnout Exit Map in the description takes the framework from this video and builds the 90-day protocol that follows from it, including the specific sequencing, the measurement checkpoints, and the accountability architecture that converts understanding into execution. Link is in the description and the pinned comment. When was the last time you felt genuinely at rest, not just not working, but actually downregulated? And what do you think closed that door? What you now know is this: the experience that opened this video, the alert that won't stand down, the engine that won't step down, the Sunday afternoon that your nervous system refuses to accept as safe. That is not a temperament. It is not a consequence of caring too much or working too hard. It is the output of a specific biological process. Glucocorticoid receptors worn by chronic load, a hippocampal feedback signal progressively weakened, a system that was designed to self-regulate and has lost, measurably, Mechanistically, some of that capacity. The man who doesn't know this experiences it as a verdict. Something wrong with him that can't be named and can't be fixed. The man who does know this experiences the same biological reality as a system with impaired feedback and specific inputs to change. That is not a small difference. Here is what to take into the next week. One thing, not 5. Request a diurnal salivary cortisol panel. 4 samples across one day. Morning, mid-morning, afternoon, evening. That test gives you the map. Not a general picture of your stress, the specific shape of your HPA axis dysregulation. Where the peak is, where the floor sits, which part of the arc has lost its architecture. From that map, every other input becomes precise. Not guessed, not borrowed from someone else's protocol. Calibrated to the actual pattern that is running in your specific system. The off switch is not broken beyond repair. The feedback circuit is impaired. Impaired circuits have inputs. You now know what the first one is. Not decline, transition. And transitions, unlike decline, have a direction. This one begins with a number, and the number is already available to you.